Welcome to my channel History with Harsa in the series of videos on modern empire. In my previous video, I have explained to you the sources for constructing the history of the modern empire and also its dynastic history. And in this video, in this presentation, we will try to understand how Ashoka, who began as an expansionist emperor, ultimately resorted to Dhamma. About Ashoka, R.C. Majumdar has said, "No figure in ancient Indian history is more familiar to us, and none leaves a more abiding impression of a towering personality than Ashoka." Before we talk in detail about his Dhamma, let us talk a little about the mystery which initially shrouded Ashoka's personality as a ruler. So in 1837, James Prinsep deciphered an inscription written in Brahmi which referred to a king called Devanam Piya Piyadasi, that is, beloved of the gods. Some years later, the Buddhist chronicles of Ceylon were examined and were found to refer to a great and benevolent Mauryan king as Piyadasi. Now the clues were put together and the final confirmation came in 1915 with the discovery of another inscription in which the author calls himself King Ashoka Piyadasi, and it was evident that Piyadasi was a second name used by Ashoka. A major political event of Ashoka's time was his war against Kalinga. Kalinga controlled the routes to South India both by land and sea, and it was therefore necessary that it should become a part of the Mauryan Empire. In 260 BCE, Ashoka campaigned against the Kalingans and utterly routed them. And in the words of Ashoka himself, 150,000 people were deported, 100,000 were killed, and many times that number perished. Though on the battlefield Ashoka was victorious, the destruction caused by the war filled him with remorse, which then ultimately turned him towards Dhamma. A policy of conquest through war was given up and replaced by a policy of conquest through Dhamma Vijay. Ashoka's policy of Dhamma has been a topic of lively discussion among scholars. The word Dhamma is a Prakrit form of the Sanskrit word Dharma. Dhamma has been variously translated as piety, moral life, righteousness, and so on. But the best way to understand what Ashoka means by Dhamma is to read his edicts. And to make principles of Dhamma accessible and understandable to all, he put up edicts or inscriptions at important points throughout the empire and also sent messengers of Dhamma outside the empire. Now, to understand the various aspects of the policy of Dhamma and the reasons for its formulation, we would necessarily need to sketch out the historical background against which it became possible for him to enunciate it. So, let us talk about the socio-economic background. By the time Ashoka ascended the Mauryan throne, the economic structure of the society had witnessed a change. Use of iron and in fact the use of NBPW, punchmark, silver coins, rise of urban centers, etc. Indicated the material prosperity of the period, and the emergence of such an urban culture demanded a more flexible social organization. On the other hand, the rigidity of the Brahmanical social order had sharpened divisions, and it was essential to bring about a climate of harmony and mutual trust in a situation such as this. What was the religious background? The Brahmanical hold over society and the rigidity of the caste system were coming under increasing attack. As opposed to it, Buddhism began as a schismatic movement from the more orthodox outlook of Brahmanism, and its principles oppose the dominance of the Brahmanas and the concept of sacrifices and rituals, and therefore appeal to the lower orders and the emerging social classes. The political background, The complexity of the state system uh, during this period demanded an imaginative policy from the emperor, which required minimal use of force in such a large empire having diverse forms of economy and religions, and it could not have been controlled by an army alone. A more flexible alternative was the propagation of a policy that would work at an ideological level and reach out to all sections of the society. The policy of Dhamma was such an endeavor. So, we have looked into the socio-economic, political, and religious background which led Ashoka to propagate his Dhamma. Now, when we talk about the contents of Dhamma, as I've already said, that the best reconstruction of Dhamma, Ashoka's Dhamma, is by an examination of the principles expressed in Ashokan edicts. When we talk about Ashoka's inscriptions or edicts, they are classified into the following. So we have major rock edicts, minor rock edicts, major pillar edicts, minor pillar edicts, and cave inscriptions. And if we look into the content of these inscriptions and edicts, we will be able to understand Ashoka's Dhamma better. So let us start talking about the major rock edicts. Now, the major rock edicts of Ashoka comprise a set of 14 inscriptions found incised on rock at 8 different places. And what are these 8 different places on where these inscriptions have been incised? Girnar, Kalsi, Shapasgadi, Mansehra, Dholi, Jogada, Bombay Supara, and Yeragudi. Now, when we examine the contents of these rock edicts, we will know how Ashoka built up his ethical principle of Dhamma. So, Major Rock Edict 1 declares prohibition of slaughtering of animals for sacrifice or for festive gatherings. And please remember that whatever content we are talking about in the rock edicts or the pillar edicts, these are also indications of the principles which Ashoka tried to establish in the empire and wanted the people of his empire to follow. Okay, so the second major rock edict, it relates to certain measures of social welfare which are included in the working of the Dhamma. For example, medical treatment for men and animals, construction of roads, wells, etc. Major rock edict 3 declares that liberality towards Brahmanas and Shramanas is a virtue, and respect to mother and father are all good qualities. Major rock edict 4 is a very important statement of the policy of Dhamma, and this edict comments that due to the policy of Dhamma, the lack of morality and disrespect towards Brahmanas and Shramanas, violence, etc., have been checked. Major Rock Edict 5. It refers to the appointment of Dhamma Mahamatas, and these special officers were appointed by the king to look after the interests of all sects and religions and spread the message of Dhamma in each nook and corner of the society. Major Rock Edict 6 is an instruction to Dhamma Mahamatas, and they are told that they could bring their reports to the king at any time. Then we have Major Rock Edict 7. It is a plea for toleration among all the sects, and it is also a plea. This is part of the overall strategy to maintain unity. Major Rock Edict 8 states that Dhamma Yatras or tours would be undertaken by the emperor, and Dhamma Yatras enabled the emperor to come into contact with various sections of people in the empire. Major Rock Edict 9. A tax ceremony is performed after birth, illness, marriage, etc. And Ashoka instead lays stress on the practice of Dhamma and the uselessness of ceremonies. Major Rock Edict 10 denounces fame and glory and reasserts the merits of following the policy of Dhamma. Major Rock Edict 11 is a further explanation of the policy of Dhamma. Emphasis is on respect to elders, abstaining from killing animals, and liberality towards friends. Major Rock Edict 12 is again an appeal towards toleration among sects. Next is Major Rock Edict 13, which is among the most important documents of Ashoka's history, and it is of paramount importance in understanding the Ashokan policy of Dhamma. It pleads for conquest by Dhamma instead of war. And by conquest, what is perhaps meant is the adaptation of the policy of Dhamma by a country rather than its territorial control. And this is Ashoka's testament against war. Major Rock Edict 14 is a short edict in which the author explains that he has had these edicts inscribed throughout the country in complete or abridged versions. So these are the major rock edicts, which are 14 in number, and as I have already explained, these edicts, the principles enshrined in these edicts were meant to be followed by the people in general, so that an ethical society, a moral society could be established. Now there is one important aspect to be noted here. We find that the major rock edicts 11, 12, and 13, they are not found at Dholi and Jogata in Orissa, and in lieu of these, two separate edicts have been inserted at Dholi and Jogata. Let us see what these two separate rock edicts are about. The first separate rock edict is addressed to the Mahamatas at Tosali and Samapa and deals largely with instructions to these officials in the proper administration of justice in the territory. And the second separate rock edict is directed again to those officials at Tosali and Samapa who worked among the people on the frontier. So this is all about the major rock edicts. Let us also talk about the minor rock edicts. They comprise a set of inscriptions incised on rock at different places: Rupnath, Sasram, Bharat, Calcutta Bharat, Maski, and then rocks in the old Mysore state. We will also look into the details of these minor rock edicts. Minor rock edict 1. In this edict, Ashoka describes himself as a Buddhist layman or upasak, and also explains that he has been getting closer to the Sangha and has become more ardent in his faith. Minor Rock Edict 2 only appears in a few places in conjunction with Minor Rock Edict 1, and it says that the virtues of Dhamma, like obeying mother and father and teachers, having mercy on living beings, and speaking the truth, must be followed. Minor Rock Edict 3. It appears only at Bharat, and Ashoka claims, uh, and he talks about his reverence to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Then the next category of Ashokan inscriptions or edicts are the major pillar edicts, which are a set of 7 Ashokan inscriptions. It is important to note here that the major pillar edicts 1 to 6 appear on Delhi Mirat, Lauria Araraj, Lauria Nandangarh, Rampurva, and Allahabad Kosam pillars. And the major pillar edict 7 appears only on Delhi Topra pillar. Now, these pillar edicts, these 7 pillar edicts, we also need to examine their content. Major pillar edict 1 states that all officials must practice and preach Dhamma, and it also details the instructions given to the Mahamatas for the propagation of Dhamma. Major pillar edict 2 enumerates all the good acts performed by Ashoka for the welfare of the people and the animals of his kingdom. Major pillar edict 3 emphasizes the need for self-introspection or self-evaluation. Major pillar edict 4 describes the duties and functions of the Rajakas, whose functions were clarified by Ashoka. And then we have the major pillar edict 5, which details various efforts initiated by the king to ban the slaughter of animals, and he orders that certain animals are not to be killed on certain days and others are not to be killed at all. Then we have the next important major pillar edict 6, in which Ashoka briefly explains the purpose of the edicts in general. And major pillar edict 7, this is the longest among his major pillar edicts, and it describes the various welfare works that he had undertaken in his empire. like planting trees, erection of rest houses, and so on. Then we come to the minor pillar edicts. Minor pillar edicts refer to four separate minor edicts of Ashoka, which are known as the Schism Edict, Queen's Edict, and then there are two commemorative inscriptions. So the Schism Edict, uh, and okay, it is these minor pillar edicts. They have been inscribed on columns or pillars of Ashoka at Sanchi, Sarnath, Allahabad, Rumindei, and Nikali Sagar. Let us talk about the Schism Edict. Uh, its three known versions are at Sanchi, Sarnath, and Kosam, and it threatens monks and nuns with expulsion should they attempt to cause disunity in the Sangha. The second one is a Queen's Edict. The Mahamatas were instructed to reckon as the second queen Karuvaki whatever gifts she had made. Then we have two commemorative inscriptions, pillar inscriptions. The Rumindei pillar inscription, which is a commemorative inscription, and it commemorates the pilgrimage made by the king to the Lumbini Grove, which was regarded as a sacred site since it was the place where the Buddha was born. And the last commemorative inscription is the Nigali Sagar pillar inscription, where Ashoka mentions his dedication for the enlargement of the stupa dedicated to the Kanak Muni Buddha. Finally, we come to the cave inscriptions of Ashoka. These cave inscriptions occur in the hills called Barabar, and they contain two groups of caves called Barabar and Nagarjuni. Uh, the records pertain to the dedication of a single cave or a group of caves to the monks. So this was all about Ashoka's inscriptions, and as we have seen, it is a big account in the sense that there are major rock edicts, minor rock edicts, major pillar, minor pillar edicts, and cave inscriptions. And whatever the content of these inscriptions, they were actually meant to be implemented throughout the empire by Ashoka so that he could establish ethics and morality in the society. So it was very necessary to analyze the major contents of all these types of inscriptions. Now let us try to examine in greater detail Ashoka's Dhamma and the Mauryan state. So Ashoka's Dhamma was not simply a collection of high sounding phrases. He very consciously tried to adopt it as a matter of state policy, for he declared that all men are my children. So it was a totally new and inspiring ideal of kingship. Ashoka renounced war and conquest by violence and forbade the killing of many animals. And since he wanted to conquer the world through love and faith, he sent many missions to propagate Dhamma. Such missions were sent to far off places like Egypt, Greece, Sri Lanka, etc. The propagation of Dhamma included many measures for people's welfare. Centers for the medical treatment of men and beasts were found inside and outside the empire. Ashoka also prohibited useless sacrifices and certain forms of gatherings which led to indiscipline and superstition. In order to implement these policies, he recruited a new cadre of officials called Dhamma Mahamatas, and they were to see that the people of various sects were treated fairly. Ashoka also started Dhamma Yatras. He and his high officials were to tour the country in order to propagate Dhamma and establish direct contact with his subjects. And it was because of such attitudes and policies that modern writers like Kern called him a monk in a king's garb. Now, Dhamma has been interpreted variously. It has been an issue of intense controversy and debate among scholars. So, in this section of the presentation, we will talk about certain uh, interpretations of Ashoka's Dhamma as has been done by various scholars and historians. So, the first theory is that some scholars have suggested that Ashoka was a partisan Buddhist and they have equated Dhamma with Buddhism. And it has also been suggested that it was the original Buddhist thought that was being preached by Ashoka, and later on certain theological additions were made to Buddhism. But a critique of this theory is that we cannot lay the charge of being partisan against Ashoka. There are two strong arguments to prove that Ashoka, as an emperor, did not favor Buddhism at the expense of other religious faiths. The first argument is that Ashoka's creation of the institution of the Dhamma Mahamatas convincingly proves that Ashoka's Dhamma did not favor any particular religious doctrine. Had that been the case, then there would have been no need for such an office, because Ashoka could have utilized the organization of Sangha to propagate Dhamma, which he did not. Secondly, a study of the rock edicts depicts that Ashoka wanted to promote tolerance and respect for all religious sects, and the duty of the Dhammamatas included working for the Brahmanas and Shramanas. Now, these 2 points make it clear that the policy of Dhamma was not the policy of a heretic, but a system of beliefs created out of different religious faiths. The second theory is, it talks about the results of Ashoka's propagation of Dhamma, and some historians believe that Ashoka's banning of sacrifices and the favor that he showed to the Buddhists led to a Brahmanical reaction, and this in turn led to the decline of the Mauryan Empire. In the same line, another argument is that the stopping of wars and emphasis on non-violence crippled the military might of the empire, which led to the collapse of the empire after the death of Ashoka. Another theory, it has been shown by Romila Thapar that Ashoka's Dhamma, apart from being a superb document of his essential humaneness, was also an answer to the socio-political needs of the contemporary situation. In support of this argument, we can say, first of all, that it was not anti-Brahmanical is proved by the fact that respect for the Brahmanas and Shamanas is an integral part of his Dhamma. Secondly, Ashoka's emphasis on non-violence did not blind him to the needs of the state, because we know that addressing the forest tribes, he warns them that although he hates to use coercion, he may be required to resort to force if they continue to create trouble. Also, by the time Ashoka stopped war, the entire Indian subcontinent was under his control. And so Ashoka's no to war came at a time when his empire had reached its natural boundaries. Another argument is that the plea for tolerance was a wise course of action in an ethnically diverse, religiously varied, and class divided society. Ashoka's empire was a conglomerate of diverse groups, and in this situation, a plea for tolerance was the need of the hour. Also, Ashoka tried to transcend the parochial cultural traditions by a broad set of ethical principles. Now, if we conclude Ashoka's Dhamma, all we have to say is that Ashoka's Dhamma could not survive him. As such, it was a failure, but he was not establishing a new religion. He was simply trying to impress upon the society the need for ethical and moral principles. So, this was all about Dhamma, how it was initiated by Ashoka, the contents of the Dhamma, and how through Dhamma, Ashoka tried to establish ethics and moral principles in society. So this is about Ashoka's Dhamma. If you have liked the video, please share it with others, and please look out for my next upcoming video on Mauryan administration. Thank you for watching. Thank you.